Sup guys, it's Mingus, and yep, we're once again slandering Netflix. The goddamn bastards have done it again, but before we open that can of worms, I want to focus not on the unfortunate reality that Netflix has decided to axe yet another beloved show, but instead, I want to talk about why it's important that the Midnight Gospel got to exist in the first place. Now, if you're watching this, unless you're one of my friends, in which case, cheers guys, you're all doing great. I kind of assume you already know the basic premise of what the show is, but to offer a surface level explanation for the rest of you guys who happen to be out of the loop, the show basically takes real podcasts and interviews and essentially contextualizes them within a fairly loose narrative alongside some seriously stunning visuals, where literally every single frame is an art piece. But even that's literally the worst possible explanation I could give. To say the show is essentially just a podcast with animated visuals would seriously be underselling what it is the show has to offer. To me, it's not really the narrative or even the visuals that gives the show that X factor. To be honest, I think the actual narrative the show presents is more or less inconsequential, but that's really not a criticism. I don't think you really go into the Midnight Gospel for the plot as much as you go into it for the atmosphere it sets. I don't know if that's necessarily the right word for it, but I'm kind of afraid to use the word vibe here, but that's pretty much what it is. I think it's no secret that the Midnight Gospel can definitely appeal to a very specific target audience, and yeah, to be honest, I don't exactly think this show is for everybody. I mean, it's kind of a non-story, and the show can definitely get pretty weird at times, but I don't know. There's something about hearing people discussing the philosophical intricacies of life and death alongside stunning psychedelic visuals that just ticks a lot of boxes in my monkey brain, but even that's still not quite painting the full picture here. Now, sure, the Midnight Gospel is trippy, but it's also kind of devastating at times. I go on about how this is kind of a non-story, but that actually really serves what it is the show is going for. These are very much real conversations that happened, real instances of people learning and laughing with each other. There's this thick layer of authenticity that's preserved throughout the entire show, especially when it comes to episodes covering conversations of people who are unfortunately no longer with us by the time the show came out. I'm trying to be pretty vague with this to avoid spoiling some of the more heavier scenes of the show, but by the time you do reach those scenes, there's so much weight in the fact that these are some of the last, if not the last recorded conversations they had with each other, and pairing that with the phenomenal visuals on display, it was actually extraordinary. I mean, I was emotional as fuck. I didn't exactly expect the trippy podcast show to end up making tears come out of my eye, but there I was, devastated. It was at this stage I realised how important this show really was. I don't want to devalue what they were before and say that these were just podcasts, but the show was really transformative in applying context and narrative. Like, yeah, these are real conversations, but the show utilizes the variety of them to effectively convey several recurring themes. God, what is this, an English essay? Right, okay, themes. I guess the main recurring theme would be the conversation about the inescapable cycle of life and death. Coming to accept the inevitability of our own morality and even coming to feel liberated about the very fact that our time on this floating rock is limited. But all of that seems a little bit heavy for a YouTube channel that talks about Netflix and video games. But you can see why I'm saying that shows that effectively cover topics like these are important. I mean, everyone's fucking miserable these days, and things really don't seem to be getting any better. What makes matters worse is that the older you get, the faster everything just starts to escape you, whilst debts and responsibilities just pile on and on. So it's really no surprise that we're all just depressed and addicted to caffeine or whatever the fuck. But I mean, every once in a while, something like the Midnight Gospel comes out and reminds you that, in all fairness, things might not actually be so bad. I mean, don't get me wrong, things are pretty bad. But when you step away from everything and assess what you actually have in life, you might still be fucked, but you might also find yourself having a lot more in life than you realized. But then, Netflix comes in and screws everything up by deciding to cancel the show, which sucks. I was seriously anticipating a second season of this, and man, it's ridiculous that Netflix persists in digging the hole of their own grave deeper and deeper. But on the contrary, I don't think Netflix cancelling the show is necessarily the problem here. This is definitely a creative injustice for sure, but let's just be real here for a second. This is very much an experimental show that's kind of targeted towards the spiritual pothead demographic, and considering Netflix's current shitstorm, I actually can see why Netflix would make a business decision like this. Granted, that is presuming the show's numbers didn't justify the numbers being spent on it. Don't get me wrong, Netflix has a serious trigger finger when it comes to axing these shows, but for me, the problem isn't so much the cancellations, as much as it's the whole ownership of the IP post-cancellation. You see, the issue is, now that Netflix has cancelled the show, Duncan Trussell, the show's creator and main character, is unable to do anything with the show or those characters now. The IP is now basically being held hostage by Netflix, and will most likely continue to be unless Duncan is able to purchase the rights back if Netflix even allows for that to be an option. Now, I know this is just a case of contracts and legality. I'm not trying to paint Netflix out to be the evil bad guys here who are just stealing people's work. The fact that they even have a platform where shows like this can even be greenlit in the first place is a testament, and I believe if and when Netflix inevitably falls out of the race, I think we may even find ourselves missing what it is Netflix has to offer. I guess the big problem is that, from how things appear, the artists are left in a position of vulnerability, and this is something I think platforms need to have a lot more consideration for. But I do know that's easy for me to say when Netflix is the platform allowing for projects like these to exist in the first place. It is really cool we live in an age where we really can afford to be a hell of a lot more experimental with these things than we've ever been able to. In the same vein of how mockumentaries are just an evolution of that format, The Midnight Gospel is very much not just an evolution, but is actually an inception of something entirely new. Narrative podcasts have existed for a long time for sure, and animated podcasts have existed too, but The Midnight Gospel is something else entirely, and while I am devastated that we'll never be getting another season, I guess I'm just glad it got to exist in the first place. I mean, I don't know. Whenever I stick on one of the more introspective episodes, I'm kind of reminded that things really aren't so bad after all. I guess it just comes back down to that old corny point of appreciating what we have while it's here, because you never quite know when it's going to come to an unexpected end.
I am not alive, I am not